ensayas rápido, entonces le pones miedo. Lo ensayas rápido, entonces le pones miedo.
Welcome back to Civil Discourse Now. I'm Mark Small.
And I'm Paul Ogden.
We're shooting today, streaming live from Big Hat Books. It's 6510 Cornell Avenue in the Broad Ripple section of Indianapolis. Excellent selection of books here. They have space here to rent for special occasions. We're discussing today the 5th Congressional District race here in Indiana. The primary is on May 8th. Our guests are Tony Long, who's a candidate for the Democratic Party in that race, and also Matt Stone, who is a blogger and has been a guest on the show before. I'm going to finish the story I was telling at the end of the first segment, and then I wanted to talk to Tony about issues. The night of the 2008 campaign, I was downstairs. I told Sarah, look, I can either wait until the returns start coming in and go downstairs and smoke a cigar, or I can be downstairs and smoke a cigar and then come up here and drink beers and watch the returns as they're coming in. So I came upstairs, and it was about 7 o'clock, and she said, I think Obama's lost. And I said, why? And she said it was 11-3 on electoral votes. And Vermont, well, then they're showing all these really huge percentages. And then they came on and said, we have preliminary votes from Indiana. Obama is carrying Marshall County, and that's Rochester, like 63%, and he's running even in Howard County. And I said, he's won. I just knew that as a benchmark, I knew that if he was carrying Howard County, even just breaking even, then that was a good indication for the election. Tony, we talked briefly last segment about the issues. What is your platform? What are the things that you're saying in your campaign?
Well, my campaign basically is on jobs. In this country, in this district particularly, in Indiana, and all of Indiana, we've taken a hit in manufacturing. The unfair trade practices that we call free trade has cost the American people about 7 million jobs between NAFTA and these free trade agreements that we've entered into. At the close of each day in the United States, we close 15 manufacturing plants. And we're on a crash course, in my opinion. This economy will never recover until we rebuild jobs in this country and create an environment to reinvest in American jobs. And we have to stop sending all of our jobs offshore, and we have to start building things in this country again. So, with my experience with labor and business throughout the state of Indiana, I've had the unpleasurable job of having to do some plant close downs, and that's a very unpopular thing to do, to see people lose their livelihood. Kokomo, Indiana, the plant I'm out of, Delco Electronics, when I hired in, had 10,000 people. Today they have 700. Over in Anderson, Indiana, we had 25,000 GM employees. Today we have 0. And that goes on throughout this district and throughout this state. At several different manufacturers that we've lost in this state. Now,
looking at Delco, and I'm from Kokomo too, and Delco at one point I think it was up to 12,000 jobs. There were a lot of people who worked at Delco, and I was talking the other night about how if you listen to the song Allentown by Billy Joel, people did what they were supposed to do. You graduate from high school, you go to your job, you get your work, you do your work there. During the 1970s, the UAW was in negotiations with the big 3 automakers every 3 years, I think, the contract.
Every 3 years in.
And the automakers in the 70s were telling the workers, don't go so much for the hourly increase. Take the long-term view. We're going to give you pensions and medical care for after your retirement. Mm-hmm. And the manufacturers did that.
Correct.
And then they basically reneged on that. They said, well, we can't afford to do that anymore.
Well, and today, if you're hired as your promoters, you don't have a pension like that I do, because that they had to give it up when they went during the bankruptcy. So now if you hire in, you don't have the same health care plan that we used to have. It's inferior to, so there's been a lot. We've had to take a back seat because of the unfair competition and the job loss. So yeah, it's not the same as it once was. And when Delphi, which was Delphi Electronics, was spun off to Delphi, when they filed bankruptcy, then all the employees lost their health care, and their pensions went over to the PBGC. The government takes care of their pensions. My wife's pension is taken care of by the government. So yeah, there's been a big disconnect for people that was promised certain things, and because of the economy, they've lost the benefits that they thought they had. But
well, and see, I might have a skewed view on this, but I think that if
Sure you do.
but I think if somebody negotiates a contract, and the other party accepts it in good faith, then the other party kind of backs out and doesn't live up to their part, which the automakers didn't. Then those shareholders should say, okay, well, we'll give you the money that we said you ought to give up for this long-term security.
You glossed over one point, the word bankruptcy, and this is one thing that people do not understand. You can negotiate the pension, you can get the pension, you can get the health care. And they can't unilaterally back out of that. They're getting out of it by going through bankruptcy. Once you get into the bankruptcy court, as you know, they can toss those things aside. And people don't understand it. They think, oh, this is something I'm going to have for sure. And it's not necessarily the case. Any company going through bankruptcy, they can shed those kind of agreements.
Right. We have to get back to the reason, though, for the bankruptcy, and it's economy driven. General Motors didn't want to file bankruptcy, and neither does any other corporation or company. But because of this economy we're into, and the reason we're having problems in this economy, in my opinion, is the fact that we lost too many jobs in this country, and people don't have a job, and we've had such a loss of revenue. Before NAFTA, we had a trade deficit in this country of about $40 billion, and today, as we speak, it's $700 billion. So that's where we've developed all these free trade agreements, starting with NAFTA, and we have to turn that around. We have to trade with other countries, but we have to do it fairly. We need to create a level playing field where the American business can compete competitively in this country.
Well, when our companies compete with foreign manufacturers for X goods, everybody says widgets, but if it's cars or whatever, manufacturers here under our healthcare system have as part of their overhead healthcare costs, unless their workers aren't covered by a company plan.
Right.
Other countries don't do that. Would you be in favor of national health care?
I'm in favor of a single payer plan. I don't think that's going to be feasible because the positions that everybody's taken on Obamacare. I think that we have to get affordable health care in this country, and everybody ought to have an opportunity to have health care. As I've negotiated contracts throughout the state of Indiana, I've had employers tell me, we can pay our current wages, but you've got to help us out on health care. If you can have if you can force the employees that you represent to start paying a bigger portion of their health care cost, we can be more competitive and we can stay in business. So healthcare cost is a driving factor, one of the driving factors that we've lost jobs out of this country because it's so unaffordable. Well, it keeps increasing each year.
It'd be kind of neat if we all had the same healthcare coverage as members of Congress have.
It's after 5 years, and they become fully vested in their plan.
But before then they have to pay a deductible?
Well, they have to buy into the plan, I think, but after 5 years, which is 6 years term.
You're talking about pension or
no, for benefits completely, both pensions and health care. It's for all federal employees.
Okay, well, wait a minute.
Well, I was looking this up online because someone's talking about Rex Santorum about he has this government health care, and his daughter's having some health care problems, and his insurance doesn't cover all of it.
But see, getting back to the point I was raising, and we were talking about jobs, and I'm sure, okay, I opened up the door on the segue. I opened the segue door. Our companies compete with other companies overseas, and one thing that weighs them down is the healthcare benefits that they have to provide employees, which if we had a single payer, I pay $1,000 a month. I know I've said this before on the show. I pay $1,000 a month for my healthcare coverage plus $2,500 deductible. And I know there are union people in Michigan that have worked on a plan on this, and they've been able to reduce healthcare costs. they focused on the fact that 17% of the people, of their members, accounted for 87% of the healthcare costs. And a lot of those costs, a lot of the costs are on healthcare because health insurance is privately owned and we're paying CEOs. But some of the costs were for inefficiency because people either were not properly diagnosed, there were too many tests that were run to get a diagnosis, there wasn't preventative care provided where people could get care before they would have something go wrong.
Right.
And so those are all costs that could be brought down, and if we had a single payer system
where government makes the decision.
where actually the government
Death
would
panels.
Death panels.
yeah, right. Like we don't have death panels right now. An insurance company decides you're not covered for a certain procedure. I'm sorry, dude. You're either dead or you're going to get that in Thailand.
Here's one that I would be in favor of looking at. John Connors, a congressman out of the state of Michigan, has introduced in the House House Bill 676, Medicare for All, and that's a basic starting point. Now, beyond that, you can increase the coverage if beyond the basic Medicare coverage, but that's something that I think we have to look at. That one I've been following. That's an interesting proposal in a House bill that right now doesn't have enough signatures, but that would be a start. It's not completely universal health care, but it's a beginning. And I think that's a bill that I'd be willing to sign on to based on what I've seen. I've been following that 676, so I think that's a good bill. It's
So,
good.
you're a union man. You've been working with unions for most of your adult life, and it's been increasingly more so that unions are less a thing in the private sector and more of something in the public sector. So, what do you say to the companies and the corporations and the small businesses? What would you do as a congressman to encourage growth in unions among the private sector?
Okay, just a second. We're the co-hosts on here, and that's fostering rational discourse by asking a reasonable question. Go ahead.
I think it's a no. I mean, I'm someone who leans to the right a bit, but I think I don't see a problem with, especially among larger companies or when your boss is the government, having a representative to voice for you.
Well, Matt, to answer your questions particularly, I could not try to, enforce people or, all I could do is tell people that basically that I live the American dream because I hired in a facility that was fortunate to be represented by the UAW, and that I would encourage people to belong to a labor union. But if they choose not to, then I would not force them or and introduce or be a part of any bill that tried to force unionization on anyone. But as far as a congressman, I would certainly stand up and say that organized labor has done a lot to build a middle class in this country, and I don't think we'd have the same middle class that we have today if it was not for organized labor. And as we've seen the number in organized labor drop throughout this country, we've also seen a drop in jobs and the economy start falling apart. So I think there's a direct correlation between the strong unionization in this country. A number of people is represented by unions, but I would not introduce legislation that would try to force unionization on people, but I do encourage it.
We were discussing this a few weeks ago when we talked about right to work on this show, and I used the example of my father was a union contractor. We're getting towards the end of the segment. I'm sorry. Okay, we're getting towards the end of the second segment. We'll be back in just a minute.